Welcome back to Show Me How. I'm with Sunette van der Berg and we're about to get stuck into our first project, a sterling silver domed ring. But before we get started, here's what you'll need for the first project. Sunette, I believe we're making this lovely domed ring. It looks very complicated.
No, not at all.
Not at all? Show me how we go about it.
Okay, because we work with non-ferrous metals,
Yes.
which means it's a metal that doesn't contain iron, to make it workable or malleable, we need to heat it with this gas flame.
Okay. Okay.
And because each metal has its own annealing temperature, we can't measure what it is, so we have to look at the color that it becomes.
I see. So we actually start off with a flat, hard metal sheet, or
Yes,
sterling
a piece
silver
of,
sheet.
of silver
Okay.
plate, yes.
Okay.
So you just light the torch. This torch is a butane creme brulee torch
Okay.
that you can
Most
do
of
a
us
bit
have in our kitchens.
Yes, absolutely. It works with butane or lighter fluid. It has its limitations, but it's very good for beginners, especially for the types of projects we're doing today.
Perfect.
So what you do is you just turn on the gas and you just switch on the button.
Okay.
Press the button.
And I suppose, like with all flames, we've got to take safety precautions.
Absolutely.
So,
We have a bowl of water, we have tweezers, and we have a fireproof surface.
excellent.
So what you need to just look out for is the hottest part of the flame is right on this light blue tip.
Okay.
So we need to actually touch the metal with this light blue
I
tip.
see. Okay. And are you going to be touching, you're going to go over the entire surface, not just on the edges?
Yeah, we're just moving gently from one side to the other, and we need the metal to become a specific color. It will first it might go through a purpley, bluey, yellowy color. Just
Okay.
pass all of that, don't worry about it. We need to get a glowing red color.
I see. Well, then you know it's very, very, very hot.
Hot, yes.
Okay. Now, by heating it from the edge to the front, is that heating it evenly?
Yes, you also don't need to turn it over, it heats it right through. So very basically what happens is while you're heating it, the molecules, they basically move apart or they expand, and the moment you quench it or cool it, they regroup with tiny
Okay.
spaces in between, and that gives it the flexibility that you need.
I see.
So we're almost at the color. It usually becomes white first, and then it has a slight bit of a red tinge
Yes,
to it.
yes.
It sometimes helps to give it a bit of shade with your hand
Okay.
to see the color better, or even dim the light or just move the light source away.
Would you like me to shade it a little bit for you to see? It's still white. It needs to go for a little bit
Yeah,
longer.
it just needs a little bit of a
I
pinkish
can
color.
see that it's starting to turn slightly.
Slightly. Orange is bad though.
That too hot?
It means you're melting it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this looks pretty good. So
Okay.
you can switch off the flame and put it to one side, and then pick it up with tweezers.
Okay.
And like I said before, we call it quenching,
Yes.
but it's basically cooling it in cold water.
You can hear that sizzle straight away.
And you can take it out and you can touch it. It's
Wow.
cold immediately.
Okay.
And then we just need to give it a quick dry. So now even if you bend it between your fingers, it's very easy to bend.
Okay. Okay.
So to bend it around into a ring shape, we use a special plier. One side is half round and the other side's flat.
Okay.
Some people call it a ring bending plier. We call it a half round flat
Okay.
plier.
And again, specialized tool stores would have that kind of thing.
You definitely won't find it in the hardware
I've never
store,
seen one.
unfortunately. So you just hold it upright like this with the half round side furthest away from you.
Okay.
And you bend out and or away from your body and
Okay.
in.
And it's all in the wrist movement.
It's
I
more
see.
in the wrist, yes.
Okay.
And then you just move it off slightly and then you repeat the action.
Going.
And
Okay.
you keep going until you have roughly half a circle. Then you switch it over
Okay.
and you start on the other end. It's important to start right from the end, otherwise you have a little flat
Yes. Yes.
flat
yes.
bit there.
And I mean the finished product is fantastic. It's completely domed and completely round, and it's amazing to see that you can achieve this result working by hand.
It takes a bit of practice.
I'm
Your
sure.
hands do have to get used to the work because it does toughen it up quite a bit.
Okay.
Just one thing I just forgot to mention is that the length of the plate is not your ordinary ring size. You actually, to dome it, you actually have to add 8 ring sizes.
Wow, that's a lot.
Because of the shrinkage.
Okay.
So if you just use it as is on a normal ring size, it would be way too small.
Yes, okay. Something to bear in mind.
So you just try and get those 2 ends to come as close as you possibly can. You can let them go underneath one another, even, and then just pull them apart slightly. You can work from various angles and various sides until you have no gaps in between. It's very important that there are no gaps in between.
Okay. Obviously, you're going to have a continuous ring, so you want a completely sealed off.
Yes, and the solder we use doesn't fill any gaps, so you need to have a perfect, there must be contact between all areas that you are working with. So I'm just working it from various sides, trying to get it as flush as I possibly can, and just with touching everywhere, basically. So if you need to, you can now use a jeweler's saw. If you have a few gaps in between, you would use it on a bench peg, which we do all our work on. Yes. And you would saw through the gap just to even it out even more and make the contact
bring
better.
it together again. Okay. But in our case, we managed to get it very close together, so we can move on.
Okay. Wonderful. So there are certain rules when it comes to soldering. The first one being no gaps. And the second one is flux, which is this funny green liquid here.
Yes.
Basically, what this is called liquid flux, but the biggest ingredient in it is borax.
Okay, and what does that do?
And what the borax does is the moment you put the flame on the metal, it oxidizes.
Okay.
So what the borax does is it actually absorbs the oxygen that comes from the flame.
Yes.
It keeps the metal clean, and it helps the solder to flow.
Okay.
So flux is very, very important. You can't solder without flux.
Fair enough.
So we've got our contact, we've no gaps, we've got our flux. Then the joint must be nice and clean, just meaning that if you've heated it before, or for copper specifically, it tarnishes very easily.
Okay.
So we just need some solder.
Okay. Now, I only know solder as in reels.
Yes, this is silver solder, and silver solder comes in 3 grades: easy, medium, and hard, which just means it melts easy or it melts hard. It has a higher melting temperature. So you always just need a tiny little piece at a time. So you just cut what you need.
And how on earth are you going to apply that? With tweezers? So we cut a tiny little piece, you were saying?
Cut a tiny little block of solder. That's all you need.
Wow.
And you put it on your board, and then you place your join on top.
I see.
And there's contact between the solder and the metal. So now we just switch on our flame.
Okay.
We take our flux and we just drip a bit of flux on the joint, and we heat it with the flame, and it bubbles white. If you have too little, you can just add a little bit more until it covers your whole joint.
Now, Sunette, you've used a very tiny little piece of solder, and right at the bottom, how are you going to spread it throughout that joint?
This solder actually bonds with the molecules of your metal. You need very, very little to have a proper joint. So it just needs to flow in between that little gap that you have. If you have too much solder, you sit with a bit of filing and sanding afterwards, so it's more work in the end. So you always try and use as little as possible. So once we've got our flux bubbling white, you just move the flame around the ring. Because this solder bonds with the molecules of your metal, it needs to be at a specific temperature. So beginners tend to want to heat the solder bit to get it to flow.
Yes.
But the solder will actually only flow once the metal is at the correct temperature.
Very interesting.
So we're almost at our annealing temperature, the same as before. It's gone that slight grayish white color. And it's starting to get a little bit pink. So then we move our flame to the front, keeping it the hottest part of the flame, and then just pulling it up right to the top. You can see it flowing, and then you keep going until you can see it shining at the top of the ring.
Yes, yes.
And that's
Fascinating.
it. And then we can switch your torch off, and you can again quench or cool it in cold water.
You can hear the heat as you put it in there.
So once it's soldered, the flux actually gives it a brown glaze.
Yes.
Because it's got borax in it.
Oh, yes.
So to clean that, we need to put it in a pickle. Now, jewelers, a pickle is basically an acid-based solution.
Okay.
There are alternatives to real acid because most people don't like having strong acid
dangerous.
around.
Yes.
So you can use something like tartaric acid,
Okay.
but you need to mix it with hot water. It only really works with hot water.
Okay.
So half a cup of hot water, teaspoon of tartaric acid, give it a few minutes and it'll clean it up very nicely.
Lovely.
We've actually got one that's already been pickled.
So, but it's still quite a dull
Yes,
colour.
absolutely. We still need to do all our sanding and polishing and everything still. And it's also got a horrible shape.
Yes, it's not nowhere near round.
Nowhere near round. So what needs to be done is we first need to get it perfectly round for it to work when we dome it. So we use a ring mandrel.
Yes.
It's made of steel. And you just push your ring on as far as it will go, and then we hammer it with a rawhide mallet. Now the reason for the rawhide mallet is it's a soft hammer, so it doesn't make any marks on our metal, but it's hard enough to actually shape it.
And to round it off.
Yes. So you would just now hammer nice
And keep.
gentle strokes, and you would look at the back of the ring
Yes.
for any gaps. So you would keep going until all the gaps disappear, turn it over, and do the same to the other side.
And now we've got a perfectly round ring.
And once you've done that, you've got a perfectly round ring.
Yes.
It is also now nice and hard as well.
Okay.
It's not soft and pliable as it was before because the hammering has now compacted all those molecules.
I'm dying to know how you create this domed effect.
Okay. So now, once you've got it round, you need to anneal it once again.
What does that mean? Heat it?
Yes, that's when we heat it again up to that greyish white with a slight pink colour.
Yes.
And after it's been annealed, because if you don't anneal it, it doesn't shape properly.
It'll be
it needs to
hard.
be nice and soft. Once we've annealed or heated our metal, you put it in this strange contraption, which is a dome block.
Okay.
You find the smallest hole that it fits into, or the tightest one. Then you take a flat punch. This is actually
It's completely flat.
It's completely flat. It's actually a car valve, so they do come in handy. We use different tools. And we just place it on top of our ring, hold it, and you take an ordinary hammer, and then you count the amount of times that you actually hammer on each side, just so it domes equally.
I see.
So the ring is forced into the round hole, and it actually shapes it into the dome shape. And then once it's been domed, it looks something like this. It has a few lines and marks on it.
So we go from this completely flat surface, and it actually looks thinner as well, but I suppose it's because it's bulged out into the dome.
And it's now shrunk to our ring size.
There you go. I remember you saying so earlier. Yes.
And we can now finish it off by sanding it with what we call buff sticks, which is basically little sticks with sandpaper wrapped around it.
And would it be a very fine grain?
You would start with a 400 grit, then move to 600 and finish with a 1200. And then you can polish it either by hand with a polishing cloth and a bit of silver, or if you have a hobby drill with a polishing mop, small polishing mop. And then you end up with your nice and shiny,
beautiful,
polished
shiny,
dome ring.
So it's actually simpler than I thought. Because, so the complicated part was really the soldering and the shaping and getting it perfectly round. But the mandrel helped us to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so the doming is much simpler than I expected, and you do end up with a very beautiful effect.
Very blingy.
Fantastic. Well, that's lovely. We're going to finish off here, and then we're going to start on our next. Well, the ring looks great, as you can see, and now it's time for our next project, which is a fine silver wire bracelet.